Welcome to the Creative Life Podcast. My name is Caroline, and I am your host. Today on the podcast, we are joined by an all-around great guy, Jason Little. And Jason, I've known for the better part of 20 years, and he's currently a chef based in Raleigh, North Carolina. He's also been a poet and an actor and a painter and a writer and many, many, many other things. In fact, I think I better just let Jason tell you his story because he's one of those people who is always trying something new and always dipping back into something he was trying before and trying it in a new way and thinking about what he can do next. Jason's also one of the people in my life that I would call if I had a new harebrained idea that I wanted to bounce off of somebody. Jason's the kind of person who would actually listen to your harebrained scheme and help you think it through and see if it might just work. So I'm excited that he's here with us today. He's got a great story to tell. And let's hear from Jason. Here he is. Jason, thanks for being with us. Thanks for joining.
I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. So I was hoping we could just start off with you just telling us a bit about your path of how you got to where you are, and that's a long story. It might be a long story, might be a winding story, but I'd love to just hear it from you.
It winds. Well, let me think. So I moved a lot as a kid, and in moving, one always tries to plant roots each time, and each time, every place was different, and every experience was different because I would either be a different age or I'd be in a different place. And so what do you do? You look for social groups to join so you can have friends. And so that pattern sort of lines up with me being a hyperactive, crazy little guy. And so I think the best way to describe me is I have tried probably everything. And I really do mean I've tried everything, like as far as like hobbies and jobs and sports and arts and instruments. It's a little like nerve wracking for a parent to see how much money they have to start and stop, and some things really stuck with me and some didn't, but it's like there's the whole like jack of all trades and master of none. And then there's me, and that's something completely over the top. But
Give me some examples. Like what are some things on that list?
On the list. Okay, here's a good pattern to follow. So I got wildly into poetry at a very, very young age. And I started writing it and writing it and reading it. And I was determined to be the poet laureate of something. And I knew it was gonna work and I wouldn't have to have a regular job. I could be a poet. And then through high school, I was entering all these contests and I was, submitting to these national things. And at one point I realized, these entry fees are just getting me published. So I'm like, I'm a published author. And I'm like, I'm a sucker because, they got all my money and I am in a book somewhere, but whatever. And so I was like, I need a way to support wanting to write poetry. And in high school, I was in the theater department. So I thought, I'll become a famous actor and then that will pay for me to be a poet. So, and I was a working actor. I mean, I majored in that in college and stuff like that. And I did, have that as a job. But I hit a point where in college, I liked making paintings. And so while I wasn't getting paid to act as much in college, I was selling the paintings. And so I thought, I'll sell paintings to support acting until that makes money so then I can write poetry all the time and be left alone.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And so this sort of like pattern of madness continued. I guess it's still going. I have 20 years of music I've made with two different friends. I did sell a lot of paintings, even in New York at some bars when I didn't know I wasn't supposed to be able to do something like that. Um, and I just would buy more paint or like get more junk off the street and make more sculptures out of them and stuff. But what's funny is to pay the rent, I'm a chef, and how that happened, I have no idea.
Oh
Um,
yeah?
they say
When did
that's like well, you really hate yourself if you're you're a creative person and you end up being just a chef. Like, well, I've read recently that like ADHD men who have had like other vocations or like are skilled at other things and stuff and just end up being chefs because like I don't know because doing the restaurant thing is this sort of like trauma structure that you fall into where it's just so hard when you first do it. It's just like, oh, I can't do this, I should quit. But if you have any kind of work ethic and you find anything creatively interesting with any of it, it keeps you attracted. You're like, wait, I want to like not fail at this. I want to not be embarrassed that I can't do it because all these other weirdos in here seem like they can do it. Why can't I do it? Um, and then somebody that you might not relate to or doesn't seem like they have their act together will say, "What's wrong with you? You're so disorganized. What? Just look at me." And you're like, "Oh my gosh, like what is wrong with me?" And then the next thing you know, you're like running a line in a restaurant and you're getting to make specials, or you're like learning like how to use your mouth to do what all your other senses were doing, or your sense of smell, and you work hard and it's rewarding and kind of beautiful, and then you're mad that you're not doing all the other things, but you can't quit. I don't know. This is a whole other podcast, by the way. This is like,
well, how long have you
yeah,
been in the restaurant food chefing business?
I guess. I mean, like washing dishes in middle school. If you want your kid to have a work ethic, stick them in a kitchen. You can always work in a restaurant. So I always have. So in my case, at the end of and after college, after being like a cater waiter or a food runner somewhere or something, I really needed work because I did a TV episode and I sold a bunch of paintings and I had a big stack of money and I didn't know how to manage it because I was in my early 20s. Um, and where I was living in North Carolina, the industry was drying up because apparently there was some tax perk that wasn't renewed
Oh,
that
I
year.
kind of remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I
Mhm.
was living high on the hog. Like I really wasn't doing a lot of normal work. I would be on a theater tour, I'd get off the tour, I'd audition for a commercial, I'd get it. I also didn't know that I was really, really lucky in that I kind of booked stuff. Like I would go out for like 3 auditions in a couple days and one of them would work and I would get that job and I'd go, okay, that's how it works. And my friends were like, that's not how it works. Like
And this
you're,
this was in North Carolina. This is when you
yeah,
were living.
yeah, sort of end of college, during college, end of college, 4 years after college, I was just kind of like working, working, working. And then the last year and a half, 2 years, I was in North Carolina, say 2003, I guess. The work just went away and there was no art shows and there's this huge shift and it's just, I fell out of the pocket and I
Mhm.
needed money because I was not managing it well. And so there was also like no jobs. It was so weird. And so I just lied and said I knew how to cook. And it took them like a week to figure it out, which is funny. I blended in. It was a small kitchen, and everybody kind of did everything. So I was like, I bet you guys are sick of washing dishes. Let me get that for you. And I managed to keep that up for a week. Um, I'll do the salads real quick. I saw you make one. Let me just slice this cheesecake up for you there. Okay. And I just kind of faked it for a while, and they pulled me aside and said, "You don't know how to cook, do you?" And I said, "No." Um, but
Mhm.
they wanted to be above board, so they trained me on everything they could think of. I had a friend that worked there doing brunches. I learned that. Um, and there's the biggest secret of all. If you need a job quick and you have kind of a thick skin, learn how to do brunch. You have a foot in the door at any restaurant anywhere in the world because everyone hates cooking brunch. Hates it. Hates, 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 hates. So
So you were cooking brunch, learning the ropes, and was this still in North Carolina, or had you moved at
Yeah,
this point?
it was
Okay,
in North
so you're down
Carolina.
there.
Yeah, yeah.
And then at what point did you jump and move to New York?
Yeah, right at the end of that, when I realized all I was doing, I eventually was cooking at two restaurants at the same time because I was like, well, I want to get better so I could go. And my idea in my head was, oh, if I get very good at this, I can get a higher paid position, which is
Mm-hmm.
not, I mean, yes and no, that's not really how it works. Like, we could get into the logistics of that too, but you don't get paid a lot. You work very hard, no matter who you are in a restaurant. Uh, I don't know. I just got stuck. There was no more time for me to do anything creative, especially
Mm-hmm.
acts. Um, so basically, I just picked up everything, put it in storage at my parents, and just went to New York. I just did it.
Yeah.
2004-ish, 2005. Yeah.
At that time, were you moving thinking I'm going to be a professional actor? Like that was the impetus to move, or was it sort
Yes.
of just I just want to move?
Well, both, but yeah, career-wise, oh, I'll figure out the acting thing up there. There's so much of that. Immediately hit a brick wall there. I mean, for several reasons. Um, I hadn't been to that city very much, so I was in a culture shock. I didn't have money. Um,
Yeah.
I had trouble learning the subway system. I had trouble just figuring out the way the city worked in general. It was all just a lot to try to do out of the gate. Um, but in quick time, within a year, I had other friends that all had done similar things at one point that were already there or that were coming there. So then I had roommates. We could lean on each other. We started a theater company. We started acting, you know, whether it was paid for or not. So, I mean, eventually I found basements to paint in. I started it up again, but couldn't afford it. And so I ended up over the years, the 15 years I was there, I ended up learning more about being a chef than anything else, I guess.
So
So
at what point with your chefing did you, I mean, there's a difference in being a cook and being a chef. And I think like at
correct.
what point did you start to get to do some chefing where you were like the one calling the shots?
Uh, and that's actually a good question. To this day, sometimes have people are like, "Hey, chef," and I'm like, "Ugh, I'm a fraud." But yeah,
After all this time, really? I mean, we're talking
yeah,
20 years.
still, I don't know, not all the time. Like I've been in enough situations now where like I'm like, "Oh yeah, this I did chef stuff, and I am the chef." But I just that was still a period where people went to culinary school or worked for like 40 years and then were in charge of a restaurant doing the bookkeeping and hiring people and their policy, you know, they were the chef. Like but without a degree, it's really hard. And then so at some time right after that, I guess in the world, Food Network is probably why. Food Network, in my opinion, is like the MTV of the next generation. Like it was like, ooh, here's all the videos of the artsy stuff of the thing that you like to consume. Here's all the like exciting people doing it. That
Yeah.
was sort of what MTV was, and then that became the food version, and we're all fatter for it. Anyway, uh, yeah, I don't know. I guess I took over a catering company's admin position, and then as soon as I did, there was a massive buyout and all the kitchen people were getting fired and it was all changing over, and then they realized they didn't have anybody that knew how to like actually run the place based on the infrastructure that was already there, like mainly a software program that the prior owner chef guy had created. And it was a really creative, interesting place, and it was fascinating. uh, but the chef that took over, which was a friend of mine, didn't know that's what he was walking into, and made
Mhm.
me do his job so he could rebuild the kitchen that they sort of tore down. So he had to train people on how to cook the food, which I was like climbing in the rafters, finding these hidden books of recipes and stuff. And they had all changed based on the people making the food who had all either quit or been fired. So next thing I knew, I was going to sales meetings, creating new things, quantifying everything, purchasing everything, dealing with the trash company and the linen company and had to get organized, which was something I was terrible at. And next thing I knew, I was basically an executive chef of a boutique, large scale catering company in Manhattan.
It just sort
And
of
I was
that just
like,
sort of happened. It just
I
sort of
was
happened.
like, yeah, well, it included like crying and going outside and screaming in
Yeah.
refrigerators and screaming into my arm. There's a lot of screaming. And sleeping on my office floor because I couldn't get the work done and I just had to stay up all night, and then
Okay.
quitting and then having them offer just enough money where I was like, wow, what a big raise. And then quitting, several months later and then giving me more and just sort of pulling the little string,
Was
yeah.
the Did you, I mean, were there times that you liked it? I mean, did it feel like, yeah, this is me, this is what I need to be doing? Or did it still kind of feel like, how did this happen?
Both. Mostly, how did this happen? And then maybe on top of that, I would kind of look down and go, wow, how did I do this? But definitely it's all driven by a fear of failure. So,
Tell me about that a little bit. Tell me about what
uh,
do you
I've stayed at so many jobs that were not right for me because I couldn't believe that I couldn't do it and I felt embarrassed. Um, and by the way, that's kind of how I've started every single thing in my life is with imposter syndrome and terror. And some of it's turned out like, oh wow, this is amazing, like acting. Like I remember the first play I did in high school was a children's play in a library, and the stakes couldn't be lower, and I was terrified, shaking, sweating, and I did it, and then like the little children cheered, and I was like, oh, I love this, and like so next thing I know, I'm in college. I'm like every semester I'd audition and be in like three plays, and they were like, do it, and I was terrified, had trouble getting my lines, all of it, but I loved it, and I just tried harder and harder and harder. And so to me, there's no distinction between if something's going to be awful or wonderful until I've done it. Um, that's just kind of how my brain works, though. I think in circles, everything overlaps, everything's a Venn diagram of itself. It's taken me years to understand that about myself and stop feeling like there's something wrong with me. There's lots of people that are like that, not just me. Um, I do find ways of linear thinking. Uh, when I do, I love it. It does not apply to all the things I like to do, but in general, in my daily life, if I find a routine that's very good for me, I definitely latch onto those. And so, for instance, the job in New York where I ran a catering company, uh, there was by the time I left, I had so many little routines that's probably one of the other reasons I stayed as long as I did. Is because I eventually added the gym into it. I eventually added vacations into it. I built a life around it that I couldn't, even if I was, say, doing like a theater tour, and then I knew that I was like going to get all my paintings together for this art show that they gave me in between that, before I was going to go shoot a commercial. I was a mess. I was like, once I have moments where I'm supposed to be happy right now, and this is all just. And I think some of that's just because it's nice to have um, enough routine or structure in your life that you don't feel like everything's panicky or unpredictable.
How would you describe yourself now? Like if someone asked you that question of like, "Oh, what do you do?" What would you say today?
I'm in my what is this? My fourth year moving back to North Carolina under some crazy circumstances that are so outside of the box that I am too much in my element. Meaning, you want to talk about structures and no structure. We moved during the pandemic shutdown in New York.
Mm-hmm.
Our jobs had changed. We didn't know if this move was temporary or not. So there's no structure there. Um, we moved without it being a planned move where someone would normally be like, oh, I bought this house upstate, or oh, I've got this job in California. And, you plan the move and then you make the move because that's how a lot of people do that. No, we were like, run for your lives, go. And so we did. And the friend who was trying to start a business, I tried to start a business with a friend. Uh, um,
That was a food business you were
that was the
talking about.
food business. I still have the food business.
Okay.
Um, it is a sort of underground supper club that couldn't be more on brand with me, which is the logistics are structured in such a way that I can't figure out. I am, in fact, a private chef for like 60 different people. If this were in New York, somebody would be like, oh, yeah, you're one of those guys. Like,
No,
there's
it's a
a niche.
legitimate business. You have a legitimate business. It's just a little bit, it's just,
Right.
it's outside of the box. It's outside of the box.
It's so
It's,
far outside of the box that I can't explain it to people. When I'm in like New York, it makes a lot of sense to people because so many people just randomly flip their phone out and go, oh, I'm going to call that guy because he can at the last minute come make canapes for me, or could meet me in the Hamptons and have already shopped and I'll pay him back. And he'll like, but around here, that's like not a common thing. And the hustle of it is common a thing. The hustle in general that I was doing in Brooklyn was way different than how I work here.
so do you do any really private chefing in addition to that, or work with any restaurants? Or you just have your own, this business that's your food business now?
I have this business as my main thing. There is a man, there's a guy and his best buddy and their neighbors in an old folks community, or the one guy lives like in a historic district in Chapel Hill, and they have a Friday club where I literally go over and make a dinner for 6 to 8 people, and they're very gracious. And sometimes I like even sit down and eat with them. They sort of have like a topic sometimes to discuss with whoever the guests are. It's like very cool. They're in their 80s and 90s. They're retired professors. They're very
Oh,
interesting. I want
I'll bet it's
them
amazing.
to
Yeah.
I want them to live to 130 because I love doing it. It's great. So I mean, I do have these. Well, I literally got off a text before we got on this podcast with somebody who's like, and I'm not making this up. This is hilarious. I have a kooky, kind of eccentric client and her husband who's kind of the dry, straight man of their shtick. They're hilarious. She's like, oh, homecoming in Chapel Hill's coming up. I really need somebody to do food for 45 people. And I said, great, I can do it. And then she said, well, our kitchen's out in the driveway because we're renovating and something went wrong. And here's all the electrical outlet specs, and come up with something for me. And I said, okay, we'll talk later. She said, oh, I can't talk later. I'm at Mount Everest right now. We're at the base camp in Nepal, down in the base camp. It's 10:30 right now. Just send it to me later. And I was like, what? And I'm like, this is kind of normal for me though, to get that kind of interaction with a client. And so that's going to be good money. And that's going to, I'm definitely a freelance person. And sometimes it just keeps falling into place. And that's been going on for like 20 years. I don't know why my life is just this Kramery or whatever you want to call it, but it's just
That
ridiculous.
that just makes me smile to know that there are people like that in the world. I
There's
I
lots of them. A
I
lot of them
aspire to
call
be
me.
somebody like that. I think that's like what I hope to be when I grow up. Somebody like
I
that.
I
Yeah,
told her she was my hero, but I also included that in the text. So
it's amazing. So you're doing a lot of things. So are you doing any other creative things for work? like as a profession at this stage?
I'm writing it's a short story now until it grows up to be bigger, which my goal is it's going to grow up to be a novel, but I'm trying to write a novel.
Cool.
It's going to be at novella size if I go back and do this 4 chapters that I sketched out. But yeah,
Are
yeah,
you hoping
I
to, like, it's the kind of thing like where you'd like to see something getting something published like that? Like you're intending to try to publish something? Or is it more like, let's see where this
yeah.
goes?
Well, everything I do, I like it. For me first, and then hopefully other people will like it. Um, yeah, but as you can see, like somebody that were listening to me talk right now would probably say you have some follow through issues, and they're probably right. I get distracted with working, and I'll set something down, and then again as a freelancer, I might be busy for many weeks in a row, and then when I come out of the busy phase and I have just a little time, there's like a lot of old bills and clean my
Mm,
closet and oh,
yeah.
this painting's right here, let me finish it, and then I don't go back to the book. It's that kind of thing.
Do you want to finish things, or is it more just like, who cares if I finish this?
I do want to finish things, and with the novel, for instance, I once heard someone say, don't worry about it getting right, worry about it getting written. And I
Mhm.
think that's a follow through thing. It's like a perfectionist kind of thing. With painting, it's really easy. That's why my default is painting, because my technique, it's a process, and it's a process that has nothing to do with me. I mean, writing is like that too, I guess. Music too, all of it. I think I'm somebody that likes to check out and just like let the other part of my brain that I can't see just do all of it, and I'll just watch. Um,
Which
yeah.
thing do you feel like, is there something that's sort of like your top fave? Like what really lights you up of your creative activities? What really is your favorite?
Hmm. Writing is my favorite, and I like never do it. um,
Huh. Why do you think you
uh,
never do it?
I, I don't know. I write I write like 2 poems a year now. Maybe that's something that kind of ran its course, though. I guess. I'll be frank. I think I don't have a creative community like I did when I was younger, because you you're not as focused on a nest egg or taking care of a kid that you've just had, or being responsible in general. A lot of people, at least I knew, coming out of college or just at that age, were just like, I don't care, I'll sleep on a floor. Um,
Right.
I right now will not sleep on a single floor, not any single one floor you show me I will sleep on. So that's kind of where I'm at.
I got you. I got you. But everyone's off doing their own thing or doing a
Yeah,
different thing. Not, yeah.
everybody's either like, oh, I can monetize this and at least justify it being like a side job or a main job. Um, you know, or it's like they've got everything whittled down to like one creative hobby, and they have their work, and they've got everything kind of compartmentalized. Um, I know a few people like me still, though, too, but more than other people would know. I guess personalities that are like this kind of cluster together, maybe, I don't know. But I don't get to see those people like I'd like to, who are just
Yeah.
kind of a hot mess and have like 5 creative things going all the time, but none of them are
Your
done.
your
I've
kindred
got
spirits.
yeah, I've got like 4 or 5 friends like that, with different personalities than me. Some of them are a lot more organized than me, and they're a little less worried about getting a creative project done. I mean, people are all different. We're all kaleidoscopes, I guess, in our own right. But um,
Would you
yeah,
describe things that you do as hobbies, or would you describe them as work or something else?
that's a really good question. Um, Definitely some have to be hobbies. They just do because I've made no effort into uh, improving them in a way that someone who cares about it being their work or about being criticized so they can sort of filter through everyone's crit of suggested improvements and try them and to see if the work they're doing does improve. Um, I noticed when I was making music with my friends, this is true too. In college, my friend and I had some drinks, of course, as you do in college, out at a bar. And we came home, and there's a guitar a friend had left, and I had a tambourine in my room. Um, I discovered we had a double cassette player, and I figured out you could record onto a cassette with microphones plugged into the thing, and you could also play something, and it would mix it in for you. It was like a factory defect that like worked awesomely. And then we decided we would just make our own music, and it was supposed to be bad. Like we weren't rehearsed, we didn't even know what the song was, and we didn't sound good. So we thought that would be if we tried our hardest and just kept recording it, that would be funny to listen to later. Our
Like
friends,
an earnest terrible thing. Is that what you were going for?
yeah, yeah, like just don't be embarrassed and do it. And then there's some stuff that's just unlistenable, so you just get rid of that. But then there's some stuff that is kind of funny, and then there was stuff that was really, really funny. And then in the act of doing it, we accidentally were rehearsing, is what was happening. We were accidentally practicing by trying to re-record something bad and add sound effects to it. But then by a week of doing this, my roommate could play chords on a guitar, and I actually was singing in key, kind of. And I was like, oh, this is like, now we know how to make music. So we just kept doing it and kept doing it. And so, yes, do I still record music with people like that? I do. Some of them are interested in our original art form. But we labeled it Captain Jerk. I don't know why it's Dadaist or something, but we call it Captain Jerk music. That's what we called it. Um, but the rule was you couldn't go back and edit. The rule was you could go back and add to it, and if you didn't like it, you just had to leave it and move on. So our goal was to find spontaneous, improvised music um, from our heads. So they all want to go back and rehearse it and make it good and then record an album, which that's work. And I would do that if I could carve out the time, which I kind of don't have. But to me, that's like a hobby of mine, or it's an art form that's for me. And so to me, that's like it may as well be a hobby, right?
Maybe some things, if I'm hearing this correctly, it's like some things in your life kind of drift back and forth between being hobbies and then being work, depending on where you are in your life, or depending on how big of a role they have in your life.
Wow, I never thought of it that way. Yeah, 100%.
Okay,
Yeah, yeah.
that's cool. That's interesting. I haven't really thought about that either, about that line between when is something a hobby and when is it a profession. I mean, there's commerce involved with something being a profession, or the goal for some commerce, maybe, but not always. Sometimes it's a bit of an attitude about the importance of it to you, I think, in some ways too. Whether you
Yeah,
consider yourself to be professional at something.
I think I wish I had looked this up. I was once in a night of like scenes. I was in two of the scenes, and there were two theater companies, and the person came out and said, "Thank you for coming out to our amateur play." And he defined what an amateur is. And he was like, an amateur is, and it was very dignified, actually. It was, I forget the parameters behind what makes an amateur, but it's someone
Mhm.
doing the work. And yeah, I guess there was something, but it was more than just the whole commerce thing. Yeah,
An
we should.
amateur is, yeah, the definition of the word really comes from the Latin, amo amas amat, I love, you love, he loves. That you're doing it for the love of it.
There it
You really
is.
do it for the love of it. So I think the um the idea of doing something with passion and being a passionate amateur is something that in some ways we use. I mean, the second definition of the word is juvenile or unpolished. People say something is amateur to mean that it's juvenile, but that's not really the root meaning of the word in how it originated. But we've morphed and changed it. So now if you say you're an amateur, people take that like you're running yourself down. But
Yeah.
I'm with you. I like this idea of taking it like, no, I'm just pursuing this because of the pure love of it.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point. There's a lot of this kind of all or nothing attitude a lot of societies have now. Whereas like you're right, like amateur, a lot of people would visualize a hack or something. And actually hack, the word hack comes from something else too. But anyway, yeah, yeah. And like I saw some kind of comedian show where they were making fun of like just going out to get a meal with someone. Can it just be that? Whereas like you go home and your partner says, how was it? And you're like, oh, it didn't blow me away. It was fine. And it's like, does everything have to like be over the top perfect? Like, or so I don't know, maybe like I really think about that a lot too. Things can be interesting and good. I don't know. I'm interested in a lot of things. But I'm not necessarily ever going to be like the master of them. Or
does that matter to you?
I don't know. In my head, I'm supposed to want that. Some things I do want that though. I wouldn't lie. I'd be lying if I said that I didn't want to sort of continue to find like some really like higher places with some of what I'm doing because
Yeah, I mean,
honestly,
I think
yeah.
I mean, it's natural if you love something that you'd want to move forward and improve and
Yeah.
get towards some end goal. But the question is like, is the goal something that's realistic and meaningful, or is the goal something that is like somebody else's goal? Like,
Yeah.
I want to do acting because I want to become a movie star is different than I want to become acting because I want to tell meaningful stories and be on stage.
Yes. However, and definitely when I was younger, there's that allure where you're like, oh, I could have all that. It looks like they're living such a wonderful, fun time life, blah, blah, blah. But, by the time I was in college, I was just like, oh, you could have like enough work that you could save money and have a house and all that stuff. Like that's, whether the level of fame at that point to me didn't matter. It was just the level of work,
Yeah, so that I can do this for my job. Like this could
right,
be, I could
right.
be a working actor. This could choose this
Yeah.
as my
In a
job.
lot of these professions, these art professions, there's a common theme of benefactors in the past and people or patrons, people or just somebody like finding a cabin they could keep warm enough to not really work that much and just spend time on their craft. And I'll be honest, that's true. I've been kind of out of work at times. I've moved somewhere or I just was between jobs and I got a lot of like say paintings done that I was really happy with. And then immediately was like angsty young man that was like, "Oh, I don't have any money. Oh, this everything's awful," and just would throw it all aside and just go to try to find work and start saving money again. And some of that's just coming out of the arts with, I'm not playing the blame game with my college or with anybody other than myself, but coming out of the arts, going like, okay, I do arts and I get money. How does this all work? Uh, a lot of that is like uh, good management and good business sense and stuff like that. And that's something I'm just getting like now in my life from having to just do it all myself over and over again. And that's fine. That's how I've learned it.
Yeah. When I got out of college, I didn't understand how money worked at all. And I think I think if I had really, I now think about it a lot. Like if I had not been living in New York and didn't need to hustle so much to pay my rent and feed myself and survive, if I had been living in a cheaper place then, how much more creative stuff could I have gotten done? Because so much of my time was absorbed with trying to stay afloat that it became secondary. Like making art became secondary to that. And I've just wondered over the years several times, like, what would it have been like if I had instead moved to upstate New York and just lived in a cabin, or any number of things instead of my overpriced Lower East Side apartment that I felt like I just had to have. So
Yeah.
anyway, live and learn, right? Live and
Yeah,
learn.
yeah. I mean, we all do, and I think the thing that eventually comes out for people is there's all these avenues as you get older you start seeing that are resources. I mean, they do have these kind of coaching accountability programs that you can take to carve out the time and work on whatever projects you want to do. And I'm not doing that right now, but what I am doing is trying to pick a horse.
Hmm.
My new strategy is to you just got to work on it no matter what, even though this other sparkly thing over here looks good,
Just pick a
so
horse. I like that.
yeah, that's what I'm trying to go back to this quote unquote novel thing that I'm writing. And
Well, it goes all back to the poetry. And all along, this was to just support yourself as a writer. So maybe that's what this is all about.
yeah, baby.
So let's say you totally have a day off. You can do whatever you want. What are you going to do with that day?
I'm running my own business. I have no time. I don't have kids. There's never a day off. There's never a day off. I don't know.
There's never a
So
day off.
there will be. There will be. It's
Okay.
slowly but surely. Yep. So say I have a day off. Okay, I'm sorry. That's too realistic.
All right,
So
let's kick it
we,
real, like fantasy
we
style.
okay, yeah. Cut that out. So
Fantasy style.
I have a day off, and
You've gotten all your stuff off your to-do list. This is not a
yeah,
honey-do day. This is
yeah.
like just a real Jason gets to do whatever he wants to do kind of day.
Okay, so it's 2026, right? No, I was kidding. Yeah. So I'm working on a sculpture that is uh, a fake rocket that you can load with with love. It's really hard to explain. It's looks like something from a sci-fi movie where they use junk to make a ballistic missile. Um, yeah, I don't know how, but I bet I'm somehow going to end up, answering questions with the FBI and be like, no, that's just a slide projector reel, and that part is hosing for my wash machine, and this is. But
You would work on your rocket.
I would write,
Uh-huh.
and I would probably, uh, exercise involving the woods just to feel good, and then I would write some more, and then I'd probably work on my a painting or my fake love rocket. Um, yeah, I have lots of sculptures that I used to make that were actually pretty cool, I think. Yeah, and so now I have the space for it in the basement, so I can go back to doing those. Candace requested even me doing one for us for our home. She liked them a lot. So
Oh yeah.
yeah, yeah.
That's cool.
If your spouse is okay with you making fake junk rockets and horses wearing samurai outfits or whatever, then go for it. I say
Yeah, that's a match.
before
That's a
the
match.
offer is rescinded, you better do it. So.
What do you want to be when you grow up?
Taller. No. Um, um, I'd like to be only doing my creative visions when I grow up,
Mm-hmm. Just
and
making stuff.
it would involve food sometimes. It would involve music. It would involve what's the I can't remember how to pronounce it. It's a German phrase. Gesamtkunstwerker, Übergesamtkunstwerker, something like that.
I don't know. I have no idea.
So it's in the 1800s. There was this sort of theater movement where in Berlin, there's these artists that were obsessed with creating something like truly creating it. Like you would let people help you when you just couldn't keep going. I might be really blowing this bigger than it was, but I remembered it being something like, you know, the the Gesamtkunstwerke. He wrote the thing, and then he produced it, and then he made all the posters for it, and then he built the set, and then he directed and he starred in it, and then he did all the tech for it, and then he like almost died from doing it, and it was like it's all his vision, and he did it, everything, and it seemed a bit narcissistic to me and kind of crazy, but I also was like, man, boy, you got to do you didn't have to go work at the donut factory that day or that week or that year. You didn't have to whatever. You worked on the thing. You did the thing you liked, all parts of it every day. Like you had no excuse. Um, did the Gesamtkunstwerker have a 401k? Probably not, but I don't know, or maybe he made enough money to keep doing his crazy German plays.
Maybe.
But
Maybe so.
yeah, so
Okay.
there's all these things that I know how to do, and there's a lot that I've not finished doing. So I'm hoping it all converges at some point. Um, yeah, come see my play I wrote about filming the food that I serve that are in front of a painting that I read a poem about. It doesn't need to be about me. I just want to be able to only do that and not do other things.
If you look back on your education, your formal
Mhm.
education,
Yeah.
were you encouraged to think creatively in any aspect? Like, can you think of some examples of when you were encouraged to think creatively in those contexts?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think very quickly I moved, and remember, I moved a lot, right? So I went to three elementary schools, three middle schools, went to high school, community college. So plenty of places, right? Every place I went, they were like, okay, because they're like, he's jumping around a lot, and they're like, feed him Ritalin, and he'll calm down. And then they eventually immediately gave in, and they're like, what does this guy need? And it's like, kind of let him do it his way. Not every place was like that, and some of them like weren't very nice about it either. But I think in kindergarten, my mom was really stressed out that I brought home a coloring assignment I had, and it was just a piece of paper that had an island and a palm tree sticking out of it, kind of up off center. And
Hmm.
we were supposed to color the sand, color the ocean, maybe if we had time, color the tree, maybe add a sun, whatever a kid would do. Mine looked crazy. And my mom was like really worried about me, which kind of was my whole childhood. But anyway, my kindergarten teacher lived diagonally across the street from us. So she went over and asked her about it. And she said, oh, no, 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 he's great. And my mom brought this picture and said, it just looks like scribbles. And she said, no, he explained it. So that one straight line, that's the ocean, that's the water line. The stuff in the tree is a monkey. The monkey's throwing coconuts down at the water because there's a submarine that's an anti-monkey submarine shooting bananas. There was a water skier. There was a treasure. There was a diver that was avoiding the bananas. I was able to explain it. I just didn't have the skill I just didn't have the patience and ability, motor skills to like, but I couldn't stop the ideas. And she goes, that's fine. She's like, he gets it. He just can't do it. He's going to figure it out his own way. And it made my mom feel a lot better, like in kindergarten. So, I mean, at least there were educators. We kind of lucked out with some of them.
Yeah.
So that's the first
A special
example. And
teacher, if you're seeing that you had such a strong inner life going on.
yeah, Mrs. Ayers, wherever she
Awesome. Shout
is.
out to Mrs. Ayers.
What up, Mrs. Ayers? Yeah.
That's awesome.
So, yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jason. Thank
Yeah.
you. Is there anything else you want to say that you didn't get to say, you think, or?
No, I just think um, hearing myself talk about all this stuff is putting it into perspective for me. It's funny to hear your own narrative. It makes me
Yeah.
want to. It makes me want to stop and do one of the things that I complain that I uh, haven't been doing because I have today off. So to talk to
Well, go
you,
do it.
I'm
Don't
gonna
do
go
any
do it.
basic stuff.
Yeah.
Don't do any bills.
No, no, no.
Go work on
Just
your
do it.
rocket.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. It was a pleasure talking to you.
It's always a pleasure talking to you. Thanks, Jason. If you want to know more about what Jason is up to and working on, you can find out more on our website, which is arts-collab.com/creative life pod. Or you can find Jason on Instagram at Vagabond Foods. And if you're in the Raleigh, North Carolina area, you should hit him up and try some of his yummy food. Thanks for being here today. And until next time, keep making stuff. Bye, everybody.